Hello and welcome everyone to Ruslan Bortnik YouTube channel in English. Today, myself, James Talberg, and Ruslan Bortnik going to have another discussion, but a little bit different from what we've used to do before. To make weekly updates, we're going to summarize the 2024 for Ukraine. Ruslan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for the invitation, James, and thank you for such an opportunity to talk about the real political trends, problems, and changes which we met during the 2024.
Ruslan, before we get into the actual breakdown of each category, I just want to make a little introduction why I think it's going to be interesting for international arena and for other people who are living outside of Ukraine, foreigners or Ukrainians that have left Ukraine at different stages of their life and different years. Before the breakdown of the war in 2022, Ukraine had a very lucrative position where we have seen trends of foreigners moving into Ukraine, investing into Ukraine, buying properties, relocating their families. Specifically in Kiev, before the war, I have moved myself, and I have met a lot of foreigners and a lot of Ukrainians who have left Ukraine at the 90s or early 2000 or 10, 15 years ago, when they have decided to relocate back or slowly, put their resources in Ukraine as well. And why I think it's going to be interesting for those people, for foreigners and for Ukrainians alike that left Ukraine a while ago, to understand where the country is heading right now. I mean, obviously, we have the part of the war that is full scale and it has a lot of influence on the life, on the economy, on the political situation. But at the same time, people continue to live in Ukraine. People continue to have their social life, to advance their career. They keep, raising kids. They keep having kids. Life goes on. And from that perspective, if we look at different countries in the Middle East, like Israel, if we look at North Korea and South Korea, there's a lot of countries that are not having a fully resolved conflict, but they continue to progress. So from that perspective, I want to highlight how is Ukraine is progressing despite the full-scale war, for people who are considering to move back or for people who are considering to invest, for them to understand where is Ukraine standing today in terms of how it's going to develop and what trends we have, what strategies they have. And if we can maybe summarize the 2024, they can have a better understanding of the economical situation, social situation, political situation, and as well we'll touch where like the war is going and how the conflict is going to be resolved, because obviously that will influence all the categories, but give that overview. And I would like to start with political developments. In 2024, if not war, there should have been election, but we haven't had election in Ukraine. Where do we stand now in terms of the political spectrum, where we haven't had election, and we still don't have, if we can say so, liberal media, because we have a governmental channel that is still controlling most of the information that the population is going to receive. So that is making for other political parties, makes that for them more complicated to present their ideas, to talk about their ideas, to have a political run for election, for presidency, or just for the parliament. So where do we stand right now, and how can we summarize the 2024 in terms of all these political trends and how they will influence the future political situation in the country?
Very important question, and but you are making me sad, because if we are compare nowadays Ukraine, and of course it is still a live country, and the main conclusion of this year that Ukraine is still full functioning country. If we are talking about in political terms, in social economical terms, in infrastructure terms, education system, medical system, transportation, bank system, everything is working in Ukraine. The good restaurants are working in Ukraine. And you can find a lot of beautiful young generation on the streets of big Ukrainian cities. This is the truth. Ukraine is still functioning state, but if we will try to compare it with the Ukrainian past, of course, this picture is very sad, because in the beginning of the Ukrainian independence, we had we had an eighth place in the world counting GDP. Eighth place is in the world. We had a space industry. We was a nuclear state. We had a population near 52 million people inside of country. We had a very resourceful country, very extremely resourceful country. We had everything. Ukrainian,
And very educated population.
yeah, Ukrainian capabilities was comparing with the France and German capabilities, for example, in 1992 and in some later years. So we had a country like German and France. Now we have a still alive country, but the country with the highest level of death in the world, and the country with the lowest level of births in the world in 2024. We have a country with very limited political competition, very limited, with censorship, with only one state managed TV channel, with prohibition of any outside political events. You can make a meeting or something like this on the streets because it's prohibited by the martial law in Ukraine. We have country which lost almost 18.5% of its entire territory. We are talking about 111,000, almost 112,000 square kilometers of our territory, and we lost not less than 10 million people starting from 2022. So we have still alive, poor, fighting, very exhausted and tired country nowadays. If you are talking from political side, of course, during this year we crossed two very important thresholds, and we still don't have a significant achievements. What I'm talking about, Ukraine was not able during this year to become a fully member of the not only NATO but either European Union. The war was going on.
But can we focus on that part? I think it's very interesting and important. Ukraine did become the candidate into the European Union, and it had a lot of, kind of like push by its allies. Hey, let's let Ukraine in because Ukraine is basically, fulfilling the whole point of the European Union being democratic, fighting for its democratic nature, and basically paying with blood for that entry into the European Union. And we had a lot of conversation happening in 2022 at the beginning of the war, full-scale war, that Ukraine will join European Union. What has happened that we haven't seen Ukraine joining at the end to EU, despite the fact that EU is still sending a lot of money to Ukraine? EU is still supporting Ukraine from a lot of perspectives. Isn't that easier for the EU to have already Ukraine joining the market instead of just helping them on a side?
We have a special agreement, trade agreement, cooperation agreement between the European Union and Ukraine also. But frankly speaking, I want to say that, for example, in 2012, the average Ukrainian salary in Ukraine was higher than in Bulgaria or Romania, which were members of European Union. So every time when we are talking about the entry into any economy or military blocks. We are talking about the political decision. And Europe Union is not able to make such political decision on Ukraine. Because of two reasons. The first reason is a military reason. Europe Union is not ready to be a fully part of this war. Because if you're talking about the European Union agreement, there is also an article about common defense.
In the European Union?
In the European Union agreement, as I remember, Article 42.7, which about the common defense, like in NATO agreement also. It was rewritten from NATO agreement, but in other words. And the European Union is not ready to be a part of it. European Union is not ready to recognize the war is going on European Union territory. It leads a reconsideration from the third countries, reconsideration of the position and the perspectives of European Union in general in such a situation. And the second question, of course, a question of money. European Union is not ready to cover Ukrainian economical infrastructure and other losses, which are counting from 300 billion United States dollars to 1 trillion United States dollars. It's a huge money. The western part of European Union is under the pressure of recession. You see the situation in Germany, for example, and there is a huge state budget deficits in these countries, in Western Union countries, Western part of European Union countries, and so they are not able to take on their responsibility for the Ukraine in ongoing war. And another reasons which we are hearing and reading in mass media, the claims from Poland, from Hungary, and so on, agriculture, trade, it's an additional reasoning why Ukraine is not be able to come into European Union. But the real questions, it's questions of peace and war, questions of money. Who will pay? Who will cover the Ukrainian entry into European Union?
Do you see the possibility of Ukraine joining the EU at the end? If so, when do you think that will happen and on what terms?
I think we have a good possibility to do it, to enter to European Union, but in case of achieving the agreement with Russian Federation. Russia is not against Ukrainian member in the European Union at all. Russia is against of NATO membering. And in case of agreement with Russia on ceasefire or for peace agreement, something like this, the Ukrainian chances to go to European Union will be much better than now. Will be much better. Also, the question of Russian frozen assets, which are mostly frozen in European Union, in Belgium. This money also, due the agreement with Russian Federation, could be even partially used to Ukrainian restoration. So without agreement with Russia, and without ceasefire, the possibility of Ukrainian entrance to European Union is quite low. And even if we are taking into account the different type of statements from Ukraine and the European Union, if we even take into account that Ukraine changed its own constitution on the European integration direction and so on, it doesn't matter. Because in the situation, in the war, the peace and the money is more important factors.
So basically, the situation in terms of the Ukrainian membership into EU is hold and being slowed by the war. And as soon as we will have a more...
It's additional motivation for Ukrainian society to fight to not become a part of Russia, official or non-official part of Russia, because we have a future in the European Union. But till the end of this war, it's very low possibility for such a scenario. Of course, Western countries, European Union countries, NATO countries will try to keep this hope.
Front of the face.
Yeah, we'll try to keep this hope in front of the face of Ukrainian society. Because it's a very important part for resilience of entire Ukrainian state in this fight against Russia.
You've mentioned at the beginning that Ukraine, in 1991, at the beginning of the 90s, used to be in the top 10
countries in the world. Yes,
in the world in terms of the GDP.
Yeah.
Obviously, in 2022, when the full-scale war started, Ukraine has lost a couple of dozens in terms of the percentage of its GDP. Ukraine has lost a lot of professionals that, with the migration of the refugees outside of the country, probably businesses, factories, manufacturers, as well as Ukraine has lost, in terms of land, almost 20% of its land on the eastern part of Ukraine, where we had a lot of production of natural resources. How much Ukraine has suffered from those losses, and how is Ukraine overcoming those challenges? Would you say that you see any trends where the economy is adapting, and if we have any sectors that are growing, accepting those challenges, any new businesses that are innovative? But just in general, if you can summarize the negative trends that we've had in 2024 for the economy and positive trends as well.
Of course, I will answer for your economical question, but I want to add to our political part also. The first conclusion which we had 2024, that we are a functioning state. But the second conclusion, that this state is standing in front of a significant changes, maybe crucial changes. What I'm talking about? I'm talking about the few thresholds which we come over during the year. The first threshold, it's a public opinion threshold. I'm talking that Ukrainian leader, the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, now in the end of the year, is not the most popular political person in Ukraine. General Zaluzhny and General Budanov are more popular than Zelensky in Ukrainian society. So Zelensky is not able to represent the whole Ukrainian society. If we are talking about the political term, not the judicial term. From judicial term, everything is clear that we have a president, but he is not most popular, and it makes a big pressure, big social pressure for Zelensky and his team to change the course of the state. And the second threshold, it's a Ukrainian attitude to the question of peace and war. During all the years of the war, 2022, 2023, Ukrainians were standing to the fight till the end, to the liberation of all Ukrainian lands, till the border of 1991. But after the unsuccess of Ukrainian offensive operation, counteroffensive operation during 2023, and after the slow going but very systematical Russian offensive operation during 2024, the public opinion of Ukrainians in this case is also changed significantly. Ukrainian society now is standing for the peace, for not to the fight till the end, but the majority of the society, from 52 to 64%, now are standing for the negotiation with Russia, ending of the war and the peace. And of course, the continuation of the policy, the fighting till the end, which is supporting the nowadays administration in Ukraine, makes a deep gap between the society, deeper and deeper gap between the society and between the political elites, military elites. It's also a significant change, a very important threshold, which together with the decreasing the popularity of Mr. Zelensky, can lead our country to the political crisis in 2025, or I hope elections, presidential and parliamentary elections, which were postponed due to the martial law in previous years. Ukrainians during this year, from political term, the majority of Ukrainians lost its confidence on the future, lost confidence
In the
of the
future country, in the future.
of the future of the countries, lost confidence in the war, in the ability to win this war. So it's very important. Talking about your economical question, of course.
Before we go into the economical part, I actually want to ask a clarifying question here. From one perspective, we have the decline of the popularity of the President Zelensky, the decline popularity of his party in the parliament. That obviously is because of less successful policies, less successful achievement on the ground in terms of the military. So the population, from one perspective, is leaning more towards peaceful negotiations. They're willing to do some compromises. So that's one perspective. From another perspective, you're saying that the popularity of the generals in Ukraine is growing. And that to me looks conflicting. And you can maybe argue that it's not, that if the population is ready to have compromises, how are at the same time we have generals becoming more popular? And why am I saying this conflicting? Because to me, it is obvious if military personnel will get into politics and become parliament members, or any of the generals can potentially become the president of Ukraine, isn't that going to be a more strict policy in terms of let's continue to fight, let's continue the war, because that's what usually they know what to do? Like, generals are like war people. That's their reality. Like, they would like to continue fight because that's what they know to do. But at the same time, people are ready for a compromise. So that to me looks a little bit conflicting, or maybe you would argue that it's not.
I don't think so, because the problem for politicians in this conflict, it's a problem of responsibility on the beginning and on the ongoing and on the ending of this conflict. The generals are not taking on this responsibility because they are curious. They were fighting as much as they could, and they are not taking this responsibility, political responsibility. So, to be honest, the more possible to find the peace between the generals than between the politicians. And if we are talking about Ukrainian generals, this is very specific generals. One of them, Mr. Valery Zaluzhny, is retired general, who now is an Ukrainian ambassador in Great Britain. Another general Ukraine is Mr. Budanov. It's one of Ukrainian generals who, before the war, they said that war will be. Generals who are in opposite, some kind of opposition to the official media, mainstream, and so on. Who is also a hero from the public side, but at the same time he has his own voice every time. He has a special positioning in this political system. So he is not connected in public view. He is not connected with the more radical part of Ukrainian political system, which insists on the fight till the end. So it's very, very specific generals. Have I answered for your question?
Yeah, that clarifies the situation. Now we can absolutely move to the economic part.
Yes, so it's also an example. De Gaulle, from French history, he made a decision like about the Algeria and so on, hard decisions, but he is general. No one can claim the soldier, the officer, that he is not patriotic enough. This is the key for this political problem. And if you are talking economical question, it's not also so easy, because now Ukraine has a GDP near 180 billion United States dollars. It's like 40, 50 places in the world rank. But half of this GDP are going through the state budget. We have a state budget near 80 billion United States dollars. But half of state budget, it's international incomes. What I mean, I'm talking about the grants and the aids and different type of financial support from our Western partners. So you can count if, for example, in some moment this Western support, this allies support will disappear, Ukraine will lose 25% of its GDP immediately and half of budget. So this money is very important. Because of this money, you see a lot of new cars, very expensive cars in Ukraine. For example, the level of buying of new cars in Ukraine during 2024 was up in 17% comparing 2023. It's also because of Western money, because partially, unfortunately, they are going in the pockets of different people. We understand it. And so it's this money, it's an important part of such alive cities, of working restaurants, of good dressed people, of and so on, of expensive cars. But this is imaginable, I think so, picture, because in every changes of this balance, the situation in the picture in our streets will change also dramatically, very fast. Now Ukraine is able to, through the taxation, Ukraine is able to gather the money only for the army and not a full amount even, because a lot of weapon, a lot of different types of tools and resources for our army we are obtaining abroad. At the same time, if you are talking about the social economical expenditures, about the salaries for teachers, pensions, and so on and so on, it's only because of Western support. It's only because it 100 Western support. Very fragile situation for Ukraine. Very.
I understand the part of the corruption and how the Western financial aid and support can be stolen from the federal.
It's not only corruption, it's a corruption also, but you need to understand, for example, if the soldier will die in the war, his family will obtain the compensation. Of course, it's a hard way to a long time you need to spend for this compensation, but your family will obtain a compensation near 300,000 United States dollars. It's a good money.
That you can definitely allow yourself to buy a car. I understand that, but I'm curious in terms of the real economy. How is the business dealing with shortage of experts to hire to move the businesses forward? How are different sectors, like we had the grain deal at the beginning of the war that was very successful and allowed Ukraine to continue earn money from those deals. What is happening in that part in terms of the real economy? Can Ukraine still continue growing? Does Ukraine still have any economical sector, industry that is still functioning and can compete on the worldwide economy perspective?
Due to official statistic, the GDP of Ukraine in 2024 will grow from 2 till 4%. So there is a visionable growth of this economical stats numbers and so on. But at the same time, the real sector of economic Ukraine is decreasing. Only the agriculture production and some a small parts of steel, coal mining, and energy sectors are
mostly on the eastern part of Ukraine.
Yes, mostly on the eastern part of Ukraine, and nowadays fights around Pokrovsk will make a significant negative influence of this steel industry in Ukraine. But it is still working, and moreover, the Ukrainian ability to defend our seaports, especially Odessa port, will lead us to situation of growing the import and export of growing this year. Not very big amounts for few billion United States dollars, but it was growing during the year. So we have a stable situation in this sphere but with a permanent shortage of different type of resources and production and so on. We lost complicated sectors of economy. We have some service industry, and we have this natural root part of our economy, and of course the Western support and partly military industrial complex also makes an influence on entire situation in the room.
Now, if we go specifically to natural resources of Ukraine that are directly influenced by the war and are making it more complicated for Ukraine to keep those mining businesses active and so on and so forth. I want to get into the war perspective, specifically the 2024, the front line. We had a couple of events where Ukrainian army got into the Kursk region, where Ukrainian army is slowly suffering territorial losses on the eastern part that are getting closer to those mines and are connected with the economical situation in Ukraine. How would you summarize 2024 for Ukraine in terms of the war? I mean, it is still stable. We still don't have strategic collapse of the front line. We only have certain parts of small tactical advantages that Russia has. But how did we get into the situation from 2023, where Ukraine was hoping to fully resolve the conflict by taking its borders of the 1991, to the situation where basically the front line is stuck and Russia has small tactical advantages and advances on different parts of the front?
Unfortunately, not only small, because during this year, Russia captured more than 300,000 square 3,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory, near the 200 settlements, 8 cities. So Russia ended the year with a significant advantage in the battlefield. But Ukraine has so this year for Ukraine, it's a year of losing the initiative in the battlefield. Russia captured this initiative and led it during the year. But Ukraine hasn't lost this war. Ukraine is not defeated, and Ukraine is still able to make a very painful for Russia counteroffensive operation. The Kursk operation showed it for us very clearly, for example. And during the year, we had this stable balance. Russia has initiative. Russia is moving toward Ukrainian territory to the west very slowly by just walking. Ukraine is making very painful counteroffensive operation. Kursk, Ukraine is attacking Russian fleets, energy structure, entire Russian territory, and so on. And no one won this war. And both sides are willing to continue it in the next year in 2025. This is a general estimation in this war. Why Ukraine is one more very significant threshold Ukraine crossed this year. It's very painful for us also that this year Ukraine lost the advantage in number of the troops in this war because heavy losses and a lot of people who escaped from the army and leads us to the situation when the Russian troops has big numbers, big soldiers, much more soldiers and officers than Ukrainian troops starting for the first time starting for the war. Even in the beginning of the war, in the Russian full-scale intervention to Ukraine, Russian troops sorry?
They were in a disadvantage in terms of the amount.
The amount of Russian troops were lower than Ukrainian troops. Now, Russian army is growing up, Ukrainian army is decreasing, and this is a very significant threshold which can lead Ukraine to a new territorial defeats and losses in 2025. Ukrainian society, Ukrainian state look more exhausted now than Russian, and the problems and interruptions with the Western support, especially with the United States support, they are making this problem even more complicated, more painful for Ukraine. So then, if you are talking about 2025 from this position, the perspectives of Ukraine is dark. Perspective of Ukraine is very dark, and without the significant increase of Western support, Ukraine can suffer of a lot of defeats during 2025.
If you compare the army that Ukraine has now by the end of 2024, having participating in a war for almost 3 years, what army is stronger? The army that Ukraine has now, or the army that Ukraine has entered the war in 2022?
I think Ukrainian army in the middle of 2022, after 6 months after the beginning of war, was much stronger. I'm not. If we are talking about the weapon, I think nowadays army is more modern. We have a lot of Western artillery system, intelligence system, and so on, even warcrafts and so on. But if we're talking about the people, this army is much weaker because more than 70% of Ukrainian army now are mobilized person who were not willing to serve in army. And in the beginning of the war, we had 70 or even more people who were volunteering in army. They have a huge, very high level of motivation to serve in army, to defend its own country. Now we have quite another situation. Only one example, maybe, but our viewers knew the situation about the Brigade of Kievskaya, which was prepared in France during the last year. We spent for this preparation, not we, our Western allies spent for its preparation near 1 billion euro. 1 billion euro, and this
was prepped in France, right? Like they were trained.
Yeah, they were. This brigade was trained in France, and during its being in French, 50 soldiers escaped from this brigade at all.
Physically, while they were in.
They ran away from this brigade to become the illegal migrants somewhere in Europe. And then after the backing home, this brigade lost 1,700 soldiers and officers who escaped from this brigade inside of Ukraine. So we spent a billion euro, and this brigade just disappeared, even not taking part in fully scaled fights in the front. So of course, it's very sharp example.
Yeah,
No, it's not this. The situation not is the same in other brigades, but it's very remarkable to understand what is going on if we are gathering to army mobilized person, not volunteers.
Ruslan, if we go into, when we're talking about troops escaping brigades, when we're talking about troops escaping the front line in general and trying to save their life, this is one trend. We also have a trend where just not military, regular citizens of Ukraine are also leaving the country, and they're not leaving the military front line, but at any war we have the military front line, and we also have the core that supplies military financially with weapons, salaries, etc., etc., etc. Those people are working inside the countries, paying taxes, producing products, services, and so on and so on and so on. We also have a negative trend from the core of Ukraine, where those people who pay taxes, who participate in the society, are leaving the country. At the break of the war in 2022, I might be wrong, but the number that I remember, we had about 6 million refugees fleeing Ukraine. After that, the trend continued, but obviously at a slower pace, where people were the Ukrainian citizens and the foreigners that were in Ukraine are leaving the country permanently. What number we're standing on at the moment in total, and specifically for 2024? How much people in 2024 have left in comparison to, I don't think 2022 will be correct comparison, but let's say 2023. 2023 was a great year for Ukraine, where Ukraine had a high hope in terms of winning that war. How many people have left in 2023 in comparison to 2024? How would you describe that trend, and how that situation is influencing the country in general? I mean, that high amount of people should be noticeable in terms of receiving your services, products, or just like operating in the society, in the city, where you might have lack of employees in big sectors that provide services to citizens of Ukraine.
It's also a very hard question because not so much people left Ukraine 2024 like in previous years. There is different estimation between 250,000 people till 500,000 people left Ukraine during this year. But the quality and value of this flow of migration is very important. Because nowadays Ukraine is losing the younger generation. We are talking about the school pupils, especially if you are talking the boys in 16, 17 years old.
Students that are trying to avoid being mobilized.
Yeah, they are with their families, they are leaving Ukraine. And we are talking about the middle class, who is more and more disappointed in the perspectives of this war. People with the money, with the good money, which are buying houses in Europe and in the United States, everywhere.
They have money.
Yes, we are losing these people. But I think the new wave of this migration could happen in 2025 if the Trump attempts to finish this war will not be successful. Now people are still waiting for the possible success of peaceful negotiation, which Trump promised during its election campaign. And if these wishes, if these hopes will be broken for some time, for example, till the June of 2025, will be quite clear that there will be peace.
We're saying that Trump has 3 to 6 months to show results.
I'm waiting for a new wave of migration from Ukraine, and I'm talking about the very valuable
I
part of society, about youth generation, middle class, businessmen, qualified workers, and so on. The people, the alive part, the alive part of society, very productive parts of society, will not be waiting for the next through 3, 4, 5 years. They will try to change their life.
their own.
Yes, if you are there is this data of United Nations which is saying for us that 6.5 million Ukrainians now are abroad like refugees. They are registered like refugees, but we understand that a big part of Ukrainians are not registered like refugees.
I absolutely agree because I live myself in Canada, in Toronto, and I think we have about 100 or 200 Ukrainians that have moved to Canada after the beginning of the full-scale war. I don't think they're considered by any means a refugee. They are in Canada on a work permit. This is not a refugee permit that doesn't count towards refugees that they have listed.
Yeah, moreover, we're not able to count Ukrainian migrants, for example, in Russia, in Belarus, and around the world, because in every country in the world, almost in every, now we have Ukrainians. So I think the real number of Ukrainian refugees and migrants is near 10 million people. Near and but people still have hope to the Trump and still are waiting for the further development of the situation. Many people postpone their main decisions about the move from the country to this time, to the time of the negotiations.
Ruslan, if we talk about those 10 millions that are of Ukrainians that are now outside of Ukraine, living abroad, building their life, some of them have been, you know, developing, progressing, starting a new life since 2022 at the beginning of the full-scale war. Would you be able to estimate, or just your personal opinion, how many of them would be willing to come back to Ukraine and on what terms?
It depends on the time. It depends on the country, because there are some public opinion surveys in different countries in Europe. In Germany, the half of Ukrainian refugees are saying that they are ready to come back to Ukraine after the peace will come. If we're talking about another countries, for example, in Poland, it's less than half. It depends on the time and the country. Of course, if this war will go on for many new years, only a small amount of Ukrainians will be willing to be back at home. Moreover, now we have 3 years of the war, but after the next, just imagine that we have another 3 years of the war, and refugees are living in their countries for 5, 7, 10 years. They are growing up their kids there. They obtaining the right to achieve the citizenship in this country.
Your citizenship.
Yeah. It's very general that 5, 7 years of residence gives the right to apply for the citizenship in many countries in the world. So there will not be any reason for these people to be back in Ukraine, because after the war, even after the war, Ukraine will not be a safe country for the people because of minor territories, because of environment pollution, because of very injured, mentally injured, also society, soldiers, and so on. So Ukraine, even after the end of the war, for a long time, will not be very pleasure place for a living, especially with families, with the kids, and so on.
You've touched the environmental situation. Do we have any data that can
No,
portray
No one wants to count what the environmental damage makes all these rockets, shells, and so on. No.
Is it like an on-purpose policy to avoid counting and making research in that perspective? Or because everybody's pushing it away, this is not a good time to deal with that because we have a better problem?
Only the explosions on Kakhovska Dam lead us to the environment losses for tens billion United States dollars, 10 maybe bigger even. But why we don't count it now? Because both sides are using the most effective weapon also, and no one is interested to show how dangerous this very important weapon to the environment, to the population. It's not a popular question and topic in Ukraine for nowadays.
From a practical perspective, I know you live in Kiev, and you can witness the situation, like, on a personal level. People that I talk to in Ukraine have said that this previous summer was increasingly warmer than what they have experienced before. Would you say that you can, on a personal level, witness how the temperature might be changing or any other climate changes that are happening due to that war?
It's only my personal, of course, opinion, experience. Of course, it was very warm summer. It was the warmest summer which I met for the last 20 years. But I don't know is the reason of it is a war or it's a global climate changes. I don't know exactly.
Now, from the international perspective, this is something else that I wanted to discuss with you. Before the war, Ukraine had a lot of political arguments with its neighbors in terms of the politics, in terms of the minorities that are living in Ukraine. And how is Ukraine dealing now with the challenges that it had for the past 10, 15 years in 2024? Like, I think the Hungarian-Ukrainian relationship is getting better. Ukraine and Poland are trying to solve their historical challenges, if we can call them that way. How would you say that in 2024, how's the Ukrainian diplomacy and the political governmental parts of the governmental bodies, parts of the Ukraine, are improving their relationships with the neighbors and the allies, and just in general, how's the international policy developing in Ukraine in the past year?
It looks like riding the waves, up and down, up and down. If we are talking about the Ukrainian-Hungarian relations, sometimes it was much better than the previous time. Then in the end of the year, they became much worse again. Dealing with the Poland, the same situation. It's like a wave, riding the waves, up and down, up and down. But in general, in Ukrainian international policy, it's a policy of disturbing. I can say it because we are trying to disturb United Nations or our allies. Ukraine is trying to don't let them sleep in this situation. Don't let them forget about this crisis. So Ukrainian international policy is very sharp. It's very sharp. We are claiming, we are making very loud statements. We are demanding. We are we are doing a lot of noise. We are trying to disturb, to don't let them sleep in this situation. If we are talking about the world, if we are talking about the allies, everywhere. I can say that this policy was very successful because I don't see a new influenceable friends which we made during this year, but I don't see very new enemies for Ukraine during this year. maybe especially the Georgia. There is no significant changes. From this perspective, this policy was a policy of keeping the balance which was formed during 2022 and 2023.
Ruslan, thank you so much for all the insights and for your perspective. There's one more thing that I want to ask you about. We have talked about multiple categories: the security of the country, the economy of the country, the social and the cultural part of the country. What's one thing that you would like to be changed in Ukraine in a positive dynamic that you think will trigger a change in all those categories into a more positive direction and trend that will help Ukraine to overcome challenges, to end the conflict with a positive situation for Ukraine, and so on and so forth?
Despite of question of the peace, the most important thing which Ukraine needs now is of course a peace. It's the end of the war. But despite of this question, geopolitical question, I think Ukraine needs a continuation of the political decentralization, because Ukraine is still divided country. We are common in the question of defending our country, but we are very divided still in humanitarian question, in religious, languages, so and so on. And maybe the resolution for this problem is to move this question to the regional level, to the level of regions, cities, which could make a decision on the history, on the language, on the religious, and so on and so on, to take all this question from the central political level, dividing level. I'm sure that solidarity of Ukrainians now is more important for Ukrainian state, even the Western support. If Ukrainian society will be very united, that this society will be undefeatable. And if Ukrainian society will be in the situation of a suffering of corruption, of the internal divisions, and so on and so on, even the Western support will not help Ukraine.
Ruslan, thank you so much for all your perspectives today.
Thank you, sir, James. Bye-bye.